Wow, thank you. It's so great to be here with you today and to see so many people supporting Israel, supporting peace, supporting two-state solution, supporting Israel's democracy, supporting our values. So it's great, really great to be here with you. 70 years ago, the State of Israel was established, and just few hours after Ben-Gurion read the Independence Scroll, another rabbi, the rabbi of Tel Aviv, read another scroll, and this was the Ketubah of my parents that got married the same day the State of Israel was established. They had just left the Irgun, the underground fighting for the existence of the Israel, and became the first couple of the State of Israel. And the next day, my father joined the army in order to defend the newly born state. So my parents fought to make their dream of a Jewish state come true. And today, our responsibility is to keep the same vision alive. This vision is not only about the existence of the State of Israel, but it is also about the nature of the State of Israel and our values. What are the values of the State of Israel? This is something that I would like to speak today with you. And the key words are a Jewish democratic state. Now, thank you, but these are words that we are all using, saying, yes, Israel is a Jewish democratic state, but frankly, what does it mean? And the different meanings of the words Jewish and democratic are tearing Israeli society apart and have created a tension with Jewish communities around the world. So we need to understand what happened since the State of Israel was created. And what was obvious in 1948 is not obvious anymore. You know, when the State of Israel was established, Jews all over the world cried with joy. Years later, their children were horrified when Israel was at war, existential war, in Yom Kippur war, and they felt that they need to protect Israel. But today, many of their grandchildren feel alienated toward Israel. And we need to turn this crisis into an opportunity. But first, we need to create a new relationship, a completely new dialogue between Israel and the Jewish communities around the world. Let's put aside the old dialogue that was, well, Israel is there for you as a shelter in case of anti-Semitism, and you will support Israel with love, donation, support no matter what. And I highly appreciate your support, but I believe that our relations are deeply, or are more deep than that. And the relations between Israel and the world Jewry should be based first and foremost on a shared values and understanding what it means for Israel to be the nation state of the Jewish people, and what does it mean to you to have Israel as a Jewish state. So my vision is based on the Scroll of Independence. And the most important principles are, and this is part of the greater vision. First principle, a Jewish state is not a religious state. It is the nation state of the Jewish people. This is the raison d'etre of the State of Israel. It was created as a national answer for the right of the Jewish people for a state. And therefore, the nature of Israel and its definition as a Jewish state is not and should not be the monopoly of the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel. The state of Israel should represent and respect all different streams of Judaism and should give space for everyone to express their faith in the way he or she feels is right. And when talking about space, let's literally make sure that every Jew, no matter how they choose to express their faith, has a space, literally a space and a place to pray at the Western Wall. It also means that conversion should be something that unites all of us, and Israel should welcome and recognize all those who convert to Judaism, those who want to be part of the Jewish people, regardless of whatever they converted was, whether it was Orthodox, Reform, or other liberal rabbi. Second, and this is not less important, and this is the second principle, we need to cherish and preserve the nature of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people with equal rights to all its citizens, without discrimination based on religion, gender, or nationality. Equal rights for every Jewish, Muslim, straight, or LGBT Israeli. This is not some kind of favor that we should do to the Israeli Arabs. This is part of our values. And equality is a Jewish value. Love thy neighbor. Love thy neighbor. ואהבת לרעך. All these are part of our Jewish values. We are not looking at the American Constitution to find out what equality means. And this is also part of what need to be the basic value of the State of Israel. So these two principles, the right of the Jewish people to a sovereign state and the rights of its citizens to equality, these values were defined 70 years ago. And these are the values that we should keep. And in two words, this is the true meaning of a Jewish democratic state. These are the basic values of the State of Israel, and these should be also the basic values that guide every Israeli decision maker. And talking about decisions, in order to keep Israel as a Jewish democratic state, and to have these values living in harmony and not in contradiction, we need a Jewish majority in the State of Israel. This is a must. And therefore, the most important decision is also maybe the toughest decision that's hanging over our heads for the past 50 years. And this is to end the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians on the basis of two states for two peoples, when each state gives an answer to national aspiration of different peoples. This is the only just solution. And this is the just solution for us as Jews, for the Palestinians as well, but this is the only way to keep our vision of Jewish and democratic state alive. And therefore, my friends, two states for two peoples is an Israeli interest. And therefore, any American president who supports the idea of two states for two people is not pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli. He represents the Israeli interest, our shared interest, the only interest that can keep the values of Israel staying alive. So those who love Israel must fight for peace as you do. And I would like to thank you for not giving up. Because these are days, and speaking the truth, these are quite difficult days for those supporting peace. And frankly, peace is the reason why I joined politics. Frankly, I hate politics, but I believe, oh yeah, I was quite a good lawyer when I decided to join politics in 1995. But I watched my two sons, they were 5 and 8 at the time, and I decided I would not forget myself if I would not do something that I believe is the only thing that is needed to keep Israel with its values and to leave them a secured Jewish democratic state. So I would not promise that peace is just around the corner. It's not. But I believe that we should not give up hope, and instead of entering to this blame game, we are blaming the Palestinians, they are blaming us, let's not forget what is our national GPS. And since our national GPS is Jewish democratic state, it's our interest to stop in a station to reach an agreement with the Palestinians. But if we have problems on the way, it's a kind of a traffic jam, problematic, so we can wait. We can continue and find other ways to move forward, but we should do everything to keep the road open. And the meaning is not to build new settlements, not to invent new settlements, because settlements activities is part of another vision for the state of Israel. It's another national GPS. And this is the vision of Greater Israel. I respect this vision. It's not mine. And those who are taking Israel with this Greater Israel GPS, for them, democracy is a burden. And their stop in the way is to act against the nature of Israel as a democracy. And therefore, we need to move forward and don't forget why and where we are heading with our own values and GPS. Now, there are new opportunities for peace in the region. We have Arab states, Muslim states, they understand that Iran is their threat, not Israel. They would like to have better relations with Israel, even peace with Israel. But they cannot say yes to peace with Israel as long as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is open. And the good news is that if we achieve peace with the Palestinians, the meaning is really a regional peace. And this is not just peace, in terms of fairy tales. This can really change strategically Israel's security. And I would like to say few words about Israel's security, because I know that as you support peace, you also support Israel's security. And I would like to thank you for standing for the idea of 2 states for 2 peoples, and standing also against those that are trying to abuse the situation and the image of Israel and attack Israel, and especially against the BDS. They don't represent the idea of 2 states for 2 peoples, trust me. They are just against the existence of Israel. And I know, my friends, that sometimes it's not easy to advocate for Israel. I know that Israel is being criticized over our military actions. And I highly appreciate the fact that you are doing it, even in times that it's not easy. And believe me, I wish that the situation in Gaza had been different. When Israel dismantled all the settlements and completely withdrew from Gaza, we didn't hope for Hamas to take over and continuing in targeting Israel with rockets and with terror tunnels. But the situation is very complicated. But I feel I don't want to speak, on Israel's security, but I would like to share something with you, because I'm leaving tomorrow for Israel, and I land in Israel just at the beginning just in time for the Memorial Day for our fallen soldiers. And I would like to say a few words about the Israeli soldiers, not only those who sacrificed their life for the security of the Jewish Democratic State, but also who serve now in the Israeli army. I know who they are. I myself was an officer in the Israeli army. My 2 sons served in combat units, and trust me, they are exactly like you young people who sit here in the audience. They come from different parts of Israel society, left and right. They are trying to do their best to defend the state of Israel. I know, thinking about my 2 sons, what they stand for and what the values they believe in. And I also know the ethical code of the IDF. So if a soldier breaks that ethical code or violates the law, he is prosecuted and punished. And I want you to know that because the state of Israel, with the values that it represents, does not and should not tolerate it. And I share this with you because I'm familiar with criticize. I know what the pictures that you see here, and I know that sometimes it's difficult to stand for these values and to stand for Israel's security, and I just wanted to share this with you personally. But talking about Israel's security, there is one thing that I would never do. And I would not use, or under the name of security, I would not use it in order to act against freedom of speech in Israel. I would never use the name of security against civil society organizations. Democracy is not only a system of election where majority rules, and unfortunately these are things that I hear these days in Israel. Well, they are the majority, we can do whatever we want. No, they don't. Because democracy is also a set of values that we must preserve and fight for. The rule of law, freedom of speech, a free press, an independent legal system that keeps Israel values, even when the government don't like it or doesn't like it. Because those that are trying to overcome our Supreme Court are those that would not accept the values of democracy. And this is time to fight for democracy in Israel, and not only in Israel. Because this is a phenomenon that we see all over the world. And it's time for liberals to unite and to fight for these values in Israel, here in the United States, and all over the world. And let me be clear. When we see trends of delegitimizing political opponents or civil society activists, I will fight for the right of all people, even those that I don't agree with their views, to speak up, to demonstrate, and to fight for their views, because this is the nature and the values of Israeli society. This is my responsibility. This is our responsibility. And I would like to promise you that we are not only share the same values, we are fighting for the same values. And democracy is not something to be taken for granted, and therefore we need to fight for it. So when journalists who criticize leaders are called traitors, when we are told not to trust our judges or law enforcement officials, when civil society activists are delegitimized, in the end, it's our liberal values that are put on the line, and therefore we need to unite in defending them. So today, my friends, I'm here with you to speak up for the values that we believe in: democracy, equality, human rights, peace. These are becoming dirty words sometimes in Israel and in other parts of the world. And we should stand and speak up and fight for it. So You know, every Israeli leader who comes to the United States, usually they start by saying that the ties between Israel and the United States are unbreakable, unshakable, and based on the shared values, which is right. This is what made the US, America, and Israel great. But it's not enough to speak about these values. It's more important to keep them and to cherish them and to fight for them. So I believe, my friends, that these are the values that Israel is based upon. These are the values of the Scroll of Independence. These are the values that we all believe in. These are the values that if we adapt and fight for, these are also the basis for a better relationship, close relationship between Israel and the world Jewry. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Oh, we couldn't see anything, huh?
No.
Will I start now?
Yeah.
Wow. That's hard to see up here. But I suppose we're all experiencing a little difficulty in watching. Our discussion today is about the relationship. We're going to analyze the relationship between the American Jewish community and Israel, the Jewish state. I want to take it apart and look at the degree to which individuals in both communities understand and relate to the other community. What does it mean? How do we act on our identities? And how do we influence? Who are we trying to influence? Now, I've been watching a lot of MSNBC and Fox News, so I am going to try and do my job as a moderator and interrupt you and shout over you and probably insult you a lot. I'm kidding. Let me start off by asking Janet. Oh, I guess let me start. This is Zoe Goldblum, who is, as some of you know, she's the president of K Street U. She's a senior at Stanford. This is Nadav Tamir, is a former Israeli diplomat, a courageous one, and he's currently the director of political and government affairs at the Paris Center for Peace. And to his left is Janet Aronson, who is the associate director of, if I get this right, the Cohen Center and the Steinhardt Center Institute at Brandeis University. You'll note that there's three names there. Cohen, Steinhardt, and Brandeis. One of the three is not a donor. You can guess which one. And Rick Jacobs is the president of the Union for Reform Judaism. Now, Janet, as a researcher in demography and sociology, trying to get what people think, what do you think Israel means to American Jews?
Okay, that's not the question I thought you were going to ask. So, it's all right. I think one of the questions about American Jewry is this narrative of declining attachment to Israel. And that's been on everyone's mind. I've heard it discussed earlier today. So when it comes to just emotional attachment to Israel, do American Jews feel like Israel has some place in their lives? If you review the data from the last 20 years, that's about all I'm going to say about data specifically. If you review the data, it's clear that some kind of attachment to Israel is strong, consistent, and pervasive in the Jewish community. Something like 70 to 80% of American Jews for the last 25 years have said either Israel is somewhat or very, I'm somewhat or very attached to Israel emotionally, or caring about Israel is an important part of my being Jewish. Now, to answer your question more specifically, we don't know from demographic data from surveys, we don't know what people really mean when they say that. So that's the big caveat. Do they mean that they have some vague attachment to Israel, some sense that it's important to their Jewish identity, which might in itself might not be too strong to them? Or are they in J Street U and taking their time and money, I think money, take time, money, energy to make this a huge part of their time, their college experience? So we don't know what that means. We also don't know if it means that they know anything about Israel. What's clear is that many American Jews are just checked out of the conversation. So they might say that they're attached, but it doesn't compel them to do anything. It's just, okay, I'm attached.
Rick, you have been, together with your predecessor, kind of at the forefront of bringing Israel into the lives of American Jews. What is that supposed to mean? Practically speaking, what do American Jews do with an attachment to Israel in their daily or weekly lives?
Well,
what do we want them to do?
Well, I think the attachment to Israel is a deep, long-standing part of Jewish identity over millennia, not just the last 2 decades. And yet, obviously, we're living in a moment when a whole lot of Jewish people who are attached are asking, what is that attachment? Is it the core of my values? And can I bring my values to my views about Israel, my relationship to Israel, my sense of what government policies mean or don't mean to me? So I think, at this moment, we're also trying to unpack what we actually are talking about. And I hear conversation regularly, particularly from Israelis and particularly from Israeli politicians, that the attachment is declining because Jews in particular, in North America in particular, have little Jewish identity, which is why they are less attached. I would make the case that they are not actually in a moment of feeling less Jewish identity, but more Jewish identity, and those values inform how they see Israel, how they see the United States of America, how they see their local community. And I think for us to have this silly conversation, frankly, are the policies of the current Israeli government pushing many away from Israel? The answer is yes. And how, I don't believe that's a debatable point. And how do you forge, and this is my predecessor and our movement's deep commitment, is how do we actually find a deep place of a bond and attachment that's not only about the headlines of any particular moment? What's the relationship to the core values upon which Israel was built? What are the relationships to the people who are across the political spectrum and, frankly, the religious spectrum? And how can we anchor our sense of progressive Zionism to not just the reality of what is, but a commitment to what was always supposed to be, and to build towards that together.
Now, Dov, let's turn this around for a second. What does the diaspora, or American Jewry in specific, mean to the average Israeli?
So first of all, I want to say that I'm very happy that J Street is having this kind of conversation, because I think it is very much connected to the goal of J Street to bring peace to the Middle East. I think that the old paradigm that Jews come together only around crisis and Gewalt is no longer sustainable, and I think Jews will come together better when Israel will be in inspiration and share their values rather than a place of horror. I think, unfortunately, for most Israelis, they see you, American Jews, in a very instrumental way. They see you as a source for lobby, for schnorr, and for aliyah. And I think this is dangerous for the concept of Jewish peoplehood, because Jewish peoplehood means that we are kind of an extended family. And if you treat your family in an instrumental way, you're not going to have a good family life. So I believe that we have to do something to change it, and I believe that this audience can help change it, because those who tell you, stay back, you're not in Israel, you don't send your kids to the IDF, you don't have a voice, are going against the concept of Israel being a homeland for the Jewish people. So if we're truly the homeland for the Jewish people, it means that you guys have a voice and you should be engaged, and you should try to make Israel what you want Israel to be, because it's your state as well.
I'm going to take a second of privilege before I ask Zoe a question, which is, as a journalist, I've found that over the last 20, 25 years, the number of American Jews murdered by Islamist terrorists and the number of American Jews murdered by far-right American terrorists is about equal. Which is to say, it's not simple one way or the other. It's also to say that the idea that we don't pay a price, we pay a lower price, it's many, many fewer than Israelis, but the fight is here too. Which brings us to the college campus.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're swimming upstream, fighting against the current? Do the Jewish students that you deal with, that you interact with, seem open to the idea of this subtle, I support Israel but not its policies?
Definitely. I think the fact that there are 1,200 students here represents that pretty clearly. And I think, my personal sort of backstory, how I got involved in J Street U, a lot of it had to do with being told growing up and going to Israel twice that Israel was my home. And I had some really remarkable experiences, emotional experiences at the Western Wall, on Masada, that made me feel that way. And the way that my relationship to Israel started to change was when I started reading these policy headlines about Sudanese refugees being turned away at the border and then shot down by Egyptian military at the Egyptian border. And I was like, what? Israel's supposed to be the ingathering of the exiles where people who are fleeing from genocide go for safety. What does this mean for a Jewish state? What does it mean for the Jewish people? And then I started learning more about the occupation. What I am asked to do on college campuses every day as an American Jew is to defend Israel. But right now, the current government of Israel isn't defending me. After the Charlottesville protests, after the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, I was unfortunately unsurprised by the fact that Netanyahu was not condemning neo-Nazis, yelling, "Jews will not replace us." I should be able to expect that somebody who says that Israel is my home is going to defend me when neo-Nazis are marching in the streets and our president is saying nothing about it that's valuable.
Well, let's go a step further.
Sure.
Netanyahu has been elected, I think, 4 times so far.
Sure.
He gets reelected. Last time he got an impressive 24% of the vote. But the parties in his coalition do represent the majority of Israelis. Most American Jews seem to have a hard time with a lot of the decisions that Israel makes. Is it possible that we're becoming one community based on Jewish values and the other community based on Jewish identity and safety?
Is that directed at me?
Yes.
I think it's the same community, right? It has to be. I think that we still share a common history, and we always will. I think that the idea that there's sort of 2 different groups splitting off and that there's still no common, there will never be any common ground anymore, isn't right. We have we have an Israeli here on this panel who's telling us, like, this is how we can engage with Israel. We can say these policies we don't agree with. That seems to indicate to me that there's still room for us to all get along as one big family. We don't have to split off. We don't have to only have, like, two different opinions on this that will never, ever mesh.
I once heard Leon Wieseltier give a speech, and he said, somebody asked him from the audience, do you think there will be one Jewish people in the year 2000? This was in the 90s. He said, I don't know the answer, but I'm happy to hear the question because it wasn't so long ago people were asking if there would be one Jew in the year 2000. But Janet, take the same question that Zoe had. Values versus identity.
Right. So I think that is the crux of a lot of this issue, that this concern about the security of Israel and the progressive values. I think that many people are caught in the middle now. That they really, both of those are important to them, and they don't want to see them in tension. And I think that's one of the reasons that this is so complex. And I think it's one of the reasons that it's hard for people to take a stand. I do want to point out, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, that the people in this room, the people who are active in the issue, engaged, reading the headlines, are actually a small portion of the Jewish community. And the majority of the Jewish community is left not knowing what to think. And I think that there's a real disconnect on some of these issues between the majority of the community and the leadership of the community, and that complicates things even further.
Rabbi, on Jewish values, I sometimes get the feeling that the problem with the relationship between the communities is that American Jews are basically allergic to guns. So the question is, to what extent do we understand each other at all as what makes the two communities tick?
I think that actually is a big category. I don't think we actually understand ourselves very well, and the Israelis do not have a clear sense of who we are. I think the way in which you hear Israeli politicians regularly, I'll just name one in particular, Yariv Levin, who's the tourism minister, who says, and he said right after the Kotel Agreement was officially passed by the cabinet 15-5, a couple of weeks later he said, why are we bothering to give non-Orthodox Jews a place at the Kotel? Because they'll be gone in 10, 20 years anyway. And the frank point is that their ignorance of our community is to miss our strength, our dynamism, our vitality, and frankly, our deep commitments to Jewish values, which are not shared. And I think there is, listen, I don't want to compare who's less knowledgeable in understanding the other, but I think there's a deep gap. But the question of Jewish values, I don't think is versus identity. I'll actually say Jewish values versus Jewish values. So let's say, for example, in Israel, we're having a debate for what public Judaism is. Is it the rabbinut, the chief rabbinates? I'll give you an example. We just had Pesach. The chief rabbi pays chometz inspectors to go around and find chametz during Pesach. Well, honestly, I keep Passover. I assume a few other people do. I would rather the chief rabbi or anybody who's expressing Judaism in the public square would address the core values of the Jewish tradition. I just heard C.P. Livni talk about equality. That's a Jewish value. Justice is a Jewish value. Respect for the other is a Jewish value. So I think we're actually having a value debate, but we don't actually have the same Jewish values undergirding our community as we have in Israel. And I think it's a fight for the soul of the state of Israel, and it's frankly a fight for what Judaism could meet in this 21st century, and that gap is growing, and it's very, very concerning.
Gil, Nadav, I'm going to ask you to do something kind of hard, which is to separate your experience as somebody who's fought and paid for the implementation in Israel of the sort of values we're talking about here. And what do you think, well, first of all, can we have an influence? Can we change what's going on in Israel from here in America? And the passion that we're hearing on this stage today, does that make Israelis feel attacked or reinforced?
Well, it's a great question. I think that Israelis in general, not just from Jews, but also from other countries, when you speak about influence, need this combination of embrace and push. If you only push us, we antagonize. If you only embrace us, we complacent. So to show the love, the empathy, understand our fears and aspirations, and at the same time to also fight for the values that you believe in, and be very hard-nosed about it. I mean, I can guess that most people here in this room don't like Sheldon Adelson, but you have to give him the credit that he's putting his money where his mouth is. And I think that Jews should be involved and should be engaged in Israel. And don't let anyone tell you that you have no say, as I said before. So I believe that you can have an influence, but you have to be less polite about this. You have to remember that Israelis don't see politeness and manners as a great and important thing. It's a different culture. We respect hard argument, and I think you guys have to, and of course from out of love. I'm not talking about we're not fighting each other. We're doing it because we care. So I think that showing that you care about us, but also showing that you have a values and you want to influence, I think you could have an important role, and also to empower Israelis, liberal, progressive Israelis, to understand that they're not alone, that we're actually the majority in the Jewish world. And if we come together, if we empower together, if we know more about each other, if we have people-to-people connection rather than financial transactions, I think we could empower each other and do many things together.
You know the expression Yerushalayim shel Mala, Yerushalayim shel Mata? Heavenly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem up there, and the earthly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem down here. One often hears Israelis questioning American Jews' knowledge of the Israel here and now, because they're involved with the Israel that we've been promised, that we read about in our myths and our prayers. Is one better than the other? Do you feel, is there a conflict? Do American Jews even understand what the Israelis are talking about?
I think so. I think that the problem is that there can be a universe in which, like, our values are lived out through the actions of the Jewish state, through the actions of Israel. That's not the universe that we're living in right now. But, like, the work that I do with J Street U is aimed to actually bring those two things closer. I think that, like, when we're thinking about, like, more, like, spiritual or, like these other experiences, like, those were the experiences that I was talking about that I had when I was at Masada. Those were the experiences that I had when I was at the Western Wall. They weren't the experiences that I had when I started reading about the occupation and learning about it. Those are the experiences where I was like, wait, Israel's a state. Israel takes actions in its self-interest. The people who are in power in Israel are taking actions to keep themselves in power. And I think that what Nadav just said actually is, like, a really good bridge to a point that I want to make, which is that, like, people in J Street U have an opportunity to be partnering with progressive partners in Israel in order to make it so that there are people in power in Israel who actually want to live out our values as well. So it doesn't feel like there's this much of a conflict between, like, my spiritual experience, which I feel is, like, really tied to my Jewish values of justice and equality, and what I actually see is the actions that the Israeli state is taking.
Janet, but pick up on this, but also the point you made earlier about the gap between the Jewish leadership, I'm not sure that's the right word for it because nobody follows them, and the Jewish masses, the Jews on the street. Can that be overcome?
Well, the American Jewish community is not a democracy. So the question of how do people get selected to be leaders of the organizational Judaism is a question of politics and power and money and who is in the institutions and how is it that those institutions have power. But can I go back to this earlier question about Yerushalayim Shel Mala? I think that we should add one other dimension to that, which is the Israel of, I'm going to say, the Israel of the movie The Exodus and the Israel of Fauda. And to me, those two Israels really represent a complete cultural shift and a generational shift in how American Jews relate to Israel. So neither one of those is the spiritual Jerusalem, but the Israel of the 1960s was a combination of the heroic Israel, at the same time, the Israel that we could support but feel sorry for. We were the rich, the rich cousins in America, and our job was just to support. Very few people traveled to Israel then. People didn't really know what was going on in Israel. The sources of news were very limited, and they came through Jewish leaders, institutions. You knew about what was going on in Israel through your rabbi, through your Hebrew school teacher, through the federation that asked you for donations. And people gave. And that was a time of tremendous unity in the American Jewish community about Israel. And now we're in a completely different place. So now we have access to all this other information. It's not that those problems didn't exist in 1948, before 1948, but people just didn't think about them. So there was kind of this heyday of Israel attachment that I think was where many of the Jewish leaders, the generation of Jewish leaders, got their start. They were raised, and they are frustrated about not being able to impart that to your generation, because we, my generation, just wants you to love Israel. Just love Israel the way I did. And it's about that fantasy Israel. And the details of what's going on in the state, that's a separate question. So I think we have this huge generational divide, attitudinal divide, and that is one of the pieces that's reflected in the leadership.
Rick, you live in both worlds. You're a Jewish leader, and you're also, you're the leader of the largest Jewish movement, and you're in touch with average Jews more than probably the head of the ZLA is. Mm-hmm. So, what's on the minds of, of Jewish representatives, of Jewish insiders, when they speak so out of sync with the people that they claim to represent?
Well, first of all, I'm actually in a lot of those rooms where Jewish leaders are talking definitively about what, the Jewish community believes, and I very often, will just do a timeout. I said, that may be true inside of your head or inside of your circle, but I can tell you that the overwhelming of Jews in North America actually do have ideas. We have surveys, we ask them questions, they answer them. And I think, to be honest, the question of Yerushalayim Shel Mala, Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the idea of this kind of the idea that North American and world Jewry get stuck in the Yerushalayim Shel Mala. We're just floating. We talk about ending the occupation. We talk about things that are really, Israelis will tell us, those are just not real. What's real is we face security challenges and we're surrounded. And the question is, can you have your feet on the ground of the Israel that actually is? And can you also have a vision of what Israel ought to become? I hear so many people here in North American Jewish life and in Israel, they know what we're against. We've got to fight BDS. We've got to fight this group that opposes. It's like, okay, I fight those every day. What are we for? What are we building? What's our vision of Jewish life? What's our vision of Israel? So if we only have our feet on the ground, we're going to just get stuck in the mud, and we're not going to actually have a sense of where we're going. And we have a lot of leaders here and there who are endlessly talking about all these issues. Many of them are urgent, but if we don't have a sense of where we're going and what we're building, I think we're lost completely. And I think that's what the question you're asking us. And I think we're allowed to have our heads above the fray, and not only to yearn, but to also in a constructive way. Because I think what Nadav said is real. First of all, it's chutzpah to tell Israelis, that we understand everything more clearly. This week we're going to observe Yom HaZikaron and then Yom HaAtzmaut, the Memorial Day and then Israeli independence. I visit friends in the cemetery. There's not a separate cemetery for the merit soldiers. or the Bayit Yehudi soldiers or the Likud soldiers, they're all resting together. And I think the question of, can we understand the realities, which are really challenging, but can we also understand that some of the security challenges that Israel faces are not only with military. They're also about the essential values. The Jewish democratic core of Israel is a security. It's about the well-being, about the ability of Israel to not only defend itself, but to be the country that not only we want it to be, but frankly that Israel has set for itself. So I think we are, we're kind of talking around these, but I think it's absolutely critical that we can articulate also in Judaically rooted language. I know many of us secular, we have different relationships to the Jewish tradition. I'm sorry, the Jewish tradition has a claim on what kind of society we build wherever we happen to live. And we're building not a society like all other societies. I know that was an ideal of the early Zionists that, we would, it was Ben Gurion said, when we have prostitutes in Tel Aviv, we'll be great because we'll be just like all the other nations. Honestly, let's build a society that reflects the nobility of the Jewish tradition.
I could add one thing on that also.
Sure.
I think that it's not just about articulating what we want to see. It's also about acting on it. And I think that that's something key that J Street U is bringing to the conference. The Stop Demolitions Build Peace campaign is very much rooted in the dynamics on the ground, both in relation to, obviously, like Israel's security concerns, but also about the ongoing demolition of Palestinian communities that threatens the future of a two-state solution and Palestinian human rights every day. And I think that we do have to be rooted in an understanding of both sort of like this high-level thinking and what's happening on the ground, but we also have to be putting our values into action each and every day. That's through policy and that's through politics, and that's what we're here to do this weekend.
So let me throw out, in 2005, I think Israel withdrew from Gaza. Hamas took over in 2007, at the beginning a year later, and what followed was a heavy barrage for several years of rockets. Non-stop, Israel went into Gaza in 2009 and temporarily stopped the rockets. It went in again in 2012, and then in 2014 it went in, and there was a massive loss of Palestinian life, and the rockets stopped. How do you reconcile those two facts? That we are offended by what we see Israel doing, but it works.
Yes.
Yeah. You have to live with it.
Well, I think that if you ask most of the security people in Israel about those issues, they'll tell you two things. One is that it was the right thing to do to move out of Gaza, even if we didn't do it in the best way that also empower the moderates on the Palestinian side. And the other is that the most important thing for Israel's security is to arrive to a two-state solution. You'll hear it from the head of Mossad, the head of Shabak, most of the generals that are leaving the IDF. Actually, the IDF today is the most progressive arm of the Israeli government because I think they understand better than the politicians the limits of hard power. And they understand that most of Israel's challenges are more on the diplomatic arena than in the security arena. So I think that, of course, I'm not a pacifist. I was an officer in the IDF, but I believe that we're strong enough to make peace. And a lot of this feeling that they're always under threat is because we were able to get the Jew out of the shtetl, but not necessarily to get the shtetl out of the Jew. We're a strong country, the strongest country in the region, and with all the problems of terrorism and stuff, it is still much, much more dangerous to drive on Israeli roads than terrorism.
Let me reframe that for just a second. I see and read and hear a lot of American Jewish progressives celebrating the fact that the Israeli military establishment is sort of on our side, but feeling very uncomfortable with the fact that they're praising generals. And it becomes, they go numb, their mouths quiver. And if 14 of the 15 living ex-heads of the IDF, the Mossad, and the Shin Bet are all in favor of the Arab Peace Initiative. Ya'alon is the only one who's not. If 14 of the 15 are in favor of keeping the Iran deal, why doesn't anybody, that should be a slam dunk. That should be the end of the discussion. Well, Rick?
I was going to just pivot back to Zoe's comment, which is about action. What do we do? People are not at this J Street conference just to hear thoughtful discourse. I look around the room, there are activists here. And I would just give, and I agree that it's about, discussion that leads to really effective strategic action. I'll just give one example. I was in Israel the end of February, and we had a remarkable protest in South Tel Aviv on behalf of the asylum seekers who are being tossed around like a political football in Israel and were threatened to be deported. And I was there with a group of young leaders from the Reform movement, not only in North America, but also from the UK and from France. And they came with me to the Jewish Agency board meeting. And the Jewish Agency, uncharacteristically, was having a debate about whether it should take a stand on the question of what would be a just resolution of the asylum seekers' cause in Israel. And we were having the usual Jewish debate, the wonderful Orthodox leader said this, and Rick Jacobs said that, and then the UJ leader from New York said this. And then two of our young leaders said, "Can we speak?" And the answer was, "Well, you're not actually credentialed." Which was, no, that's not a good answer. Please give them the microphone. And Celia Teddy, who is a past nifty social action vice president and religious affairs vice president, said, and Rachel Wolf, who's a wonderful Reformed Jewish leader from her congregation in Northern California, said, "Excuse us. This is an urgent matter of Jewish values. If the Jewish Agency and the Israeli government and the Jewish community can't find its voice on this, it doesn't deserve to be in leadership." And what happened? They weren't shown the exit. They weren't said, nice leaders. They actually carried the day. And the Jewish Agency voted. It wasn't as strong a statement as many of us wanted, but they voted to express themselves on behalf of the asylum seekers. Now, of course, we know what happened recently, that all of a sudden the Prime Minister found his moral voice, and with the UN, and frankly, with support here in North America from not the left or the center, but also some pretty strong voices from the right, and then hours later walked away from it. So I got to say that action is about putting pressure and taking stands and not backing down when you don't get an immediate response that you were looking for. And I also think this is a moment where young people are leading our community. They're not waiting for their time. This is their time. And we, the Jewish community, Zoe's an example, 1,200 leaders. These are not people waiting for their moment. They are every day leading our community. Let's broaden who we think are Jewish leaders today.
I'm not sure that we have any time left, but I really want to get a sense from all of you of whether that image of what happened in Jerusalem with the Jewish Agency, why doesn't that happen more often? Well, who else? John.
I'll say something. I think that the question of what do leaders have or organizations have at stake to maintain negative narratives, that it's not just a question of staying in power. And you mentioned this, it's the shtetl Jew, it's the ever-dying people, it's all these things we've heard that there's so much of the Jewish community that is based on fear. It's fear of assimilation, fear of dying out, fear of being be killed, and fear of BDS. And all of these fear-driven positions are so unhelpful. I'll put it that way. And I think that, and as you said about, trying to turn that into a positive view about Jewish life, and frankly, as someone who's been deeply involved in my whole life, I am so tired of those negative messages. And I really would like to see them turned around, not just about Israel, but about a lot of aspects of Jewish life, and a lot of this line drawing of who's legitimate, who belongs in the tent, who doesn't belong in the tent. And I think, there's a lot we could just open up the conversation and open up the community.
I think if I could also circle back a little bit to the question both of Gaza and of this element of fear, I think another element that I see a lot in the American Jewish community, especially with our relationship towards Israel, is hopelessness. I know that after the 2014 war in Gaza, part of the reason that I felt compelled to join J Street U was because over the summer I was watching as the death tolls of civilians in Gaza just climbed ever higher. And I was looking around at my community, and I was like, where is the compassion? Where is the empathy? Why aren't we speaking out about this? Why don't we seem to care? I know that the situation in Gaza is really complicated. I understand that Hamas is ruling the Gaza Strip, and I know that there are rockets that are threatening Israeli lives. But I think that in the American Jewish community especially, we've almost become paralyzed by this sense of hopelessness, of there's no solution for Gaza. There are over 1 million people there who don't have access to consistent water, to electricity, have no freedom of movement, and we consistently turn a blind eye.
Sounds like Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, no, it actually really does. But
sorry, I interrupted you. I
No,
promised I would interrupt.
That's okay. But I think that we have to acknowledge that the American Jewish community has a Gaza problem. And that problem has continued to this day. I feel that we have a moment to not be hopeless right now, because there are nonviolent protests that are being led by people in Gaza that have been happening for the past 3 weeks. I want to be clear that I know that there have been some violent elements to them, but they have been the majority of them have been nonviolent. That's something to feel hopeful about. In a politics between Gaza and Israel that has been dominated by violence for so long, how can we not look at nonviolent protests and be uplifted by that? How can we not grapple with it, even if we don't agree with the ideology behind it? And I think that we should all, I feel horrified personally to know that the Israeli military has been using live fire against these nonviolent protesters, that over 24 people have been killed, that over 1,300 people have been injured by it. I think that we should say something. But I think it's, like Rabbi Rich Jacobs said, this isn't just about saying something and about having a clear image about what's happening in Gaza. It's also about putting our values into action. And as a community, what are we going to do about Gaza? What is our plan? We need to figure it out. And I think that if I've learned one thing being a part of J Street, it's that when I see a political problem, there is a political solution to that problem. And it is up to all of us, to the people on this panel and to the people in this room, to figure out what is our political solution to this political problem going to be? How are we going to organize so that we don't have to see another war in Gaza? I think that's the answer to the problem, potentially. But I also think that, we have to be acknowledging this more. The American Jewish community has to be responding when we see a humanitarian crisis that is just getting worse and worse in Gaza.
I think we're about at it. I hate to be the only one here who's fighting with you guys, but the idea of Palestinians waking up one day and figuring out that if 100,000 of them march on the border, nobody can stop them. I think that the government and the army, which are usually at odds on these issues, look at what's going on in Gaza now, and they think, oh, it's happened. Israel's worst nightmare. How do you stop 30,000 people from walking over the fence? And it's not, I don't think it's cut and dry.
And I think to the point I was saying earlier, I'm not from the community organizing model, but what I say is if people have legitimate fears, you can't just say to them, don't be afraid because some of it is nonviolent, because even if most of it is not violent, I don't see how that would be an effective response, an effective strategy to change people's minds, and because it's legit. There is There is fear that is the community we build on, we build up, and hopelessness, and it's generations, and it's not founded. And then there's legitimate fear, and it's often hard to tell the difference. So I don't know how you respond to that strongly held view in the community.
But how do you say that sort of thing in public without losing your public? People here are so passionately worried, alarmed by what they're seeing in Gaza, and Israelis feel like, I think, there's nothing much else we can do.
Well, first of all, I do want to move the conversation back to the Israel-Jews relations, because we have many panels that are dealing with the political issue. But I think, you mentioned hope, and I think we have to remember that hope is actually the name of our national anthem. And sometimes we forget it. And I think I learned from one of my professors at the Kennedy School that a leader needs a combination of hopeful heart and critical mind. So we have to put that, and somehow to also the relations between Israel and the US diaspora. And I think there are several things that we can do. One of the things is that there are many organizations, including also here, Israeli organizations that are doing work, including in Gaza. The organization that I'm with, the Peres Center, for example, but there are many others. I just have the opportunity to do some propaganda. And I think that it will be great if American Jews could be part of those efforts. That will be very empowering. Another thing that I think we could do is that Israelis will learn more about you. Because many Israelis are completely ignorant. They don't know the power of this community. They don't know the power of pluralism. They don't know the power of philanthropy, because in Israel we think that if we pay our taxes and we serve in the army, that's all the rest of the state should do. So I would do certain things to connect between the communities. One of them, very critical, is what we call reverse birthright. I think it is amazing that almost every child in Israel during high school is visiting the camps in Poland, the Nazi camps. And it's important to visit the camps, even though I would shape the message a little different, and not only in strengthening the trauma and the victimization. But I think it's important that we will also visit live Jews in America. And every child in Israeli school will spend some time in an American community and learn about you guys, because that will be a life-changing experience. Secondly, I think that we should have much more connection between organizations, progressive organizations, because most Jews just know that Israel is its government. They don't know about so many things that are happening. Maybe we should have a fund that gives seed money to joint ventures between organizations here and organizations there that are doing work for Tikkun Olam. And thirdly, I think that it will be great if we ever have a constitution that there will be someone in Israel, maybe the president, because the president is supposed to be not political, that he will have the power to cancel any Knesset resolution if it works against the connection with the Jewish world. Because we need someone who see the connection of Jewish peoplehood and not just the political, that politicians care about their constituencies. So they don't care about liberal Judaism because it's not a majority in Israel. And they usually see you in an instrumental way because by definition, that's their job. If they're from the foreign ministry, they want to have help in Congress. If they're from the absorption ministry, they want you to come. We need some institution that is looking at Jewish peoplehood and how we could help Jewish peoplehood. And whenever the Israeli government is taking decisions against Jewish peoplehood, we should have this kind of institution that calls out and makes sure that we keep on being together.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a very long time. I just went on Medicare. I think this is the first time I've heard anybody from either side urge more cooperation between the American Jewish left and the Israeli left. The Orthodox and the right are very comfortable with each other and very cooperative, but the left on both sides of the ocean seem not to be aware of each other. Yep. But let me go on. Last question. Just quickly, each of you, the word hope and the word despair. Despair is a word you hear a lot these days. How do you measure the two? How do you live with one? How do you live with the other? can one be turned into the other?
Wow. That's a tough question.
What do you, it's not theory. What do you feel? What do you do with what you see in the world and what you hope for in your activism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, like for me, is that it feels like when I am in a moment of despair, when I see things that are happening on the ground, when I hear that Susia is receiving more demolition orders, when I know that Khan al-Ahmar is being faced with the prospect of complete evacuation just this month, I do feel that despair, and oftentimes I sit with it for a little while because I'm not sure what to do about it. But again, I've learned how to organize. I've learned how to get my fellow students organized so that we can find a way to respond to the dynamics that we're seeing and not feel so powerless. Like we can actually, like Rabbi Rick Jacobs talked about how the people, like the young people are leading. We're leading right now. And I think that the way that we're leading is through actually taking responsibility for creating the change that we want to see. And we're doing that every day. We're doing that this week with the letter by Representatives Yarmuth and Schakowsky by advocating for that on the Hill. We're doing that by dropping off 1,000 letters to the Israeli embassy advocating against demolitions. That's what makes me feel hopeful, is that there are so many students behind this who are saying, in the face of a politics that would aim to disempower us every single day, we're going to take back that power, we're going to speak up and let our voices be heard, and we're going to advocate for something different.
Hope and despair.
Okay, so in my life, in diplomacy and in government, I noticed that one of the strongest phenomena out there is self-fulfilling prophecies. When you say we have no partner for peace, eventually you behave that you have no partner for peace. When you say the whole world is against you, eventually you behave. And so I believe in the power of optimism. I believe in the power of hope. My boss, President Peres, used to say two things about why he's so optimistic. The first was that he said, optimists and pessimists die the same way, but they live very differently. I think it's much healthier. But the second thing that he said, and I want to remind all of you, with all the criticism at Israel, which I share, he used to say, I am an optimist because I have a license to be optimist. I was here when Israel was nothing. It was a doubt. We were outgunned, outnumbered, no natural resources, and look what we made of this place. So he said, the same optimism I have for peace. Because I remember the days when people say we can never have peace with Egypt or can never have peace with Jordan. So until his last day, he was very hopeful about peace with the Palestinians. And I want to remind all of you that optimism is not just a way to perceive the world, it's also a way to affect the world. So let's keep hope.
So I do have to answer this on a really personal level, and this is not my researcher hat. This is just I'll use my trajectory. As I said, I grew up, very attached to Israel. I've never been an advocate. I've never been an activist. I just was interested in living my Jewish life, and I would say that has all turned around through my children, who have taught, one of whom is here. And I have learned so much from them, and I hear this from a lot of my peers, that going through how much they loved Israel, and then going through that period of despair, of finding out it's not what we always thought it was. And that was the despair. And I think that the only hope, and so this has been a long period of rethinking what I always thought was true. And it's been very difficult, but I think that I believe in the truth. And I think that you can't move forward unless you know the truth. And we all have to take our heads out of the sand and see what's actually going on in the world, in our community, both in Israel and here. And I think that gives me hope, because that's the first step.
There's just so much despair here in the United States. It's outside, it's inside of us. I think we can be paralyzed by the despair that threatens to consume us. I don't think that the despair should have even the slightest impact on our ability to dig deep. The poet Yehuda Amichai, in his poem Ba'ir Atikah, talks about us, our people, being nigu'e tikva. Negaim from plagues or infected. He said, we as a people, we are infected with hope, meaning it's inside of us. We can't be cured of it. And it's not a kind of a naive, I hope things will get better. That kind of hopefulness is not what our people actually have built, not only our Jewish state on, but our lives. But the sense that I actually am obligated to move the project of my people forward. And I see, my hope is when I see the activism that is coming together in this country. I see it also in grassroots in Israel, and I see it in other parts of the world. I think the hope is that people are standing up, finding a backbone, finding a voice, and finding concrete things to do to not be consumed by the despair, but rather to live out the commitments that we as a people have always put front and center. And I just think also that even the conversation today, there are people who would say, pro-Israel. I heard this at another conference a few weeks ago, that to say pro-Israel automatically means you're pro-peace. I actually don't hear that very often. And I hear sometimes people telling me and telling Zoe and all of us that if you're pro-Israel, you're pro-settlement. That you are someone who, if you hold these commitments, you have to at the same time, hold this set of ideological attachments above all other values. And I think that we have to find a way to say that pro-Israel is about pro-peace, it's about pro-pluralism, and we can't have a shortage of empathy. If I have only empathy for the people who are just like me, I don't have empathy. I have to have empathy. And if I can feel the pain of what it's like for the people of Gaza to live in an impossible situation, and the sort of the responsibility for that is not on one other party. It's not entirely on Israel. There's a whole universe of people who, frankly, have responsibility to make sure that impossible and degrading human, kind of footprint on the planet, that we address those. And that's part of the hope. To see in the most impossible, the most intractable challenges facing our people and our world, that there are places for us to not only yak about, but to act about. And that gives me hope.
Well, the thought agonizes me lately, and there's an old saying, I am optimistic in the sense that I fully expect things to get better. I'm pessimistic in the sense that I fear my optimism is ill-founded. Let me throw out a thought that may either be shameful or a source of pride. I take it as a source of pride, but I'm a little ashamed of that. Why was the response to the Parkland shooting so different? What happened this time that turned into a national movement where in the past it's simply been depression and despair? And I would suggest, without being too serious about it, that this is the first time the shooters picked a school that is half Jewish. There's something about Jewish mobilization. But there's also the story about the Jew in the shtetl who walks down the street and he sees his friend sitting on the roof of the mikveh, under the ritual bath. He says, what are you doing up there? He says, the community is paying me to look out for the coming of the Messiah. And the one on the ground says, what kind of a job is that? Is the pay any good? He says, the pay stinks, but it's a guaranteed future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we're done.